Most people picture the final surrenders of World War II as exercises in professional courtesy. Allied and German generals facing each other across polished tables, soldier to soldier, respect intact. But when a Wehrmacht commander with no SS connections, no party membership, no direct link to atrocities, when that man sat down with General George Patton and asked for mercy based on his clean record, he didn't receive a polite refusal. He received a philosophical demolition of what it means to serve inside a criminal machine. To understand why Patton told him, quote, zero, you need to see the battlefield he was standing on first. Spring of 1945. The German war machine was dying. Patton knew it. He could feel it in every engagement. The enemy still fought, desperate men, armed and cornered, still capable of killing. But this was the thrashing of an organism that had lost its spine, its nervous system, its chain of command. The Third Army pushed forward at a pace that outran its own supply lines, shattering what remained of German resistance with a force that felt unstoppable, because it was. Yet underneath this broad strategic disintegration, individual commanders were running their own desperate calculations. Patton's forces crossed rivers, seized towns, opened concentration camp gates, and processed thousands of German prisoners every single day. The commanders swept up during those final weeks were not a monolith. Some were fanatics, loyal to Hitler past the point of reason, unable to accept the war was ending. Others were career professionals who had served the Wehrmacht with genuine competence, now carrying deep shame over the horrors conducted under Germany's flag. Many were just exhausted. 6 years of unbroken war had hollowed them out. They wanted it over. A smaller but notable group understood the situation with perfect clarity. These men sought to negotiate, for themselves, for their troops, for whatever fractured command apparatus still functioned. It was inside this chaotic final chapter of the European war that a German general found himself standing before Patton at Third Army headquarters in Bavaria. His name was General Heinrich Ritter, a senior Wehrmacht commander captured after his forces collapsed under a Third Army offensive near the Austrian border. Ritter was old-school military, a junior officer in the First World War, an interwar career spent climbing through the German military's administrative ranks, promoted on merit and discipline, not political loyalty. He was not an ideological Nazi, never joined the party, no SS ties, no connection to the machinery of atrocity in occupied territories. By his own testimony, backed by statements from his subordinates, he saw himself as a man who fought for Germany, not for Hitler. That line between the two mattered enormously to him, and it was the central argument he intended to present when he stood before Patton, speaking through a military interpreter in the spring of 1945. He had asked for this meeting himself. That alone was unusual. Most captured German generals moved through standard prisoner of war processing without ever facing a senior Allied commander directly. But Ritter claimed to hold intelligence on German defensive preparations further east. He offered to share it, in exchange for guarantees regarding his men's treatment and his own status as a prisoner. Patton agreed to meet him, partly for the intelligence value, partly because Patton was genuinely fascinated by German commanders and how they thought. The setting was formal. Patton's chief of staff attended. Several senior officers flanked the room. Interpreters stood on both sides. The atmosphere was precisely military, consistent with Patton's style, which demanded ceremony in official settings, regardless of how casually he carried himself in private. Ritter walked in with a strategy already mapped in his mind. He'd thought through every detail of his approach, understood the danger of his position, but also its leverage. He possessed intelligence the Americans wanted. His service record, judged by wartime standards, was clean. Several thousand men still under his command could lay down arms in good order, or keep fighting, at a cost nobody needed to pay. The strategy was straightforward. Present himself as a rational professional meeting fellow professionals. Build rapport and shared military discipline. Negotiate from that foundation. What he hadn't fully accounted for was Patton. Ritter opened with his background, years of service, distance from the Nazi Party, distance from its political rot inside the Wehrmacht. He spoke of professional ethics, rules of warfare, humane treatment of captured soldiers. American prisoners taken by his units, he insisted, had been handled in strict accordance with the Geneva Conventions, a fact he clearly expected would register with an American general. He declared himself a soldier first, a German second, and as one professional to another, he expressed hope for productive conversation. Patton sat motionless, listening. He could listen with extraordinary precision when he chose to, and right now he chose to. He wanted to read this man completely before offering a single word in return. When Ritter finished, Patton let silence hang for a moment, then asked plainly what exactly the general was requesting. Ritter laid out his terms. His men would be treated as prisoners of war under full Geneva protections. Officers separated from enlisted personnel per established procedure. He himself would receive treatment appropriate to a senior officer, no indignities beneath his rank. Then came the pause, barely perceptible, the only crack in an otherwise polished exterior. He added that these assurances should extend to recognition of his cooperation in any post-war legal proceedings that might affect him personally. There it was. Patton had seen it coming from the moment this meeting was arranged. The general wasn't just negotiating for his soldiers. That alone would have drawn a simple answer. He was looking past the surrender, toward tribunals, investigations, accountability, trying to trade information and compliance for personal safety. Patton studied him for a long, deliberate stretch before speaking. He told Ritter he appreciated the honesty and intended to match it. The treatment of prisoners under Third Army Command was not negotiable. Every German soldier who laid down his weapon would receive full Geneva Convention protections, regardless of whether their commanding general cooperated with American intelligence. That was the standard Patton maintained. It was the right thing to do. He stated this with absolute clarity, so no ambiguity could survive. Then he shifted. The general's personal circumstances, that was a different conversation entirely. He acknowledged hearing Ritter's self-portrait, the professional soldier who served Germany, not Hitler. No party ties, correct treatment of prisoners, a clean line drawn between his own conduct and the crimes committed under the German flag. Patton found this portrait interesting. In his experience, German officers who had genuinely treated prisoners well kept their distance from the party and maintained professional honor were, at this exact moment in history, the loudest about saying so. Meanwhile, those who had done other things, signed orders feeding the camps, authorized executions, enabled the horrors his army was uncovering mile by mile as it pushed east through Germany, those officers had far less interest in discussing their records. He admitted plainly that he could not yet determine which category the man sitting before him occupied, nor did he possess the authority to make that judgment. That, he said, was for others to determine through formal proceedings and evidence, a process no conversation in a Bavarian headquarters could shortcut. Ritter indicated he understood, but pressed his point again. He wasn't asking for immunity, he was asking for consideration. He claimed to have risked his career on multiple occasions to protect men serving beneath him. He possessed documents detailing specific moments where he had refused orders that would have led to abuse of civilians and prisoners. He was willing to hand over every page and cooperate fully with any investigation. His only request was that this cooperation be formally recognized, that he receive the chance to present his case individually, not swept into a blanket verdict that drew no line between honorable service and criminal behavior. Then he said something that changed the air in the room entirely. He said he was begging. He chose that word deliberately. He understood exactly what it cost a German general of his rank and generation to speak it aloud to an American officer. He appeared to General Patton, soldier to soldier, to use whatever influence he carried to ensure one thing: that the line between honorable conduct and criminal action survived the reckoning ahead. Because if that line vanished, he argued, military honor itself became an empty phrase, and every man who had fought to uphold it had done so for nothing. Silence filled the room. Patton's officers watched him, waiting. This was not simple. The man sitting before them was either exactly who he claimed, a professional soldier who had tried to serve with integrity inside a dishonorable cause, or he was a sharper version of every German officer who suddenly located a conscience the moment defeat arrived. No one could know the truth without a proper investigation, and no one had time for one. Patton stood. He paused. Then he spoke. He said his entire career had been spent preparing for and fighting the German army. He carried a professional respect for what German soldiers had accomplished on the battlefield, and he would not pretend otherwise. He believed there were German officers who had served with genuine honor. Their service deserved to be distinguished from those who had not. He gave his personal word that the documentation Ritter referenced would reach the appropriate authorities, that the general's willingness to cooperate would be entered into the official record. Then he said something no one in the room expected. He told the general there was something he needed to hear clearly. He was speaking now not as a commanding officer addressing a prisoner, but as one soldier giving another an honest assessment. The Germany this general had served, the Germany of professional military tradition, of Prussian honor, of the principles Ritter had invoked as the foundation of his service. That Germany was gone. Not destroyed by Allied armies, destroyed by the man who had hijacked it and bent it toward purposes that had nothing to do with the values the general claimed to represent. The general and men like him had faced a choice years ago: serve that system or resist it. Most chose to serve. That decision carried consequences. Consequences that could not be bargained away in a Bavarian room in 1945. Patton made clear he was not calling the general a criminal. He didn't know that, and he wouldn't pretend to. But a plea for recognition of honorable service, arriving at this exact moment, from a man who had served the regime until it collapsed, needed more than the general's own testimony to carry full weight. If the record was what the general described, the evidence would prove it. And the evidence was what mattered above all else. Then Patton delivered the words that outlasted everything else spoken in that room. The words his officers would remember and commit to paper long after. He said he had no mercy to give. Not because he was cruel, though he could be. Not because he missed the point of what the general wanted. He understood it completely. He refused because mercy wasn't his to give. The people who died in those camps his army kept finding, the ones who bled out on far-off beaches, in hedgerows, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes, the murdered civilians, they held that authority, to grant mercy or to withhold it, and they were gone, beyond asking. All Patton could do, all any of them could do, was make sure the record was accurate, make sure the accounting was honest. He told Ritter plainly, if his service had been honorable, honesty would protect him better than mercy ever could. And if it hadn't been, then no mercy in the world would be enough. Ritter was led back to the prisoner processing area. The documents he'd referenced were gathered and forwarded, exactly as Patton had promised. His cooperation went into the official record. Whether it helped him in the proceedings that followed, the historical record doesn't say. What is documented is this. After the meeting, Patton sat down at his desk and wrote a single line in his diary that evening about the encounter. "I met a German general today who asked me for something I did not have, and I told him so. And it was the most honest conversation I had conducted in a very long time." 3 weeks later, the war in Europe ended. Patton showed up to the official ceremonies wearing his trademark expression, a man who'd rather be somewhere else doing something useful. He shook the right hands, said the right things, then went back to work. There was an occupation to run, a war still burning in the Pacific, and 1,000 problems demanding the attention of the most effective commander the American military had. He never spoke publicly about his meeting with Ritter, never mentioned it in speeches, press conferences, or interviews before his death. It was one encounter among countless others in a career built on such moments, and he gave it no special weight. But the men who were in that room remembered differently. They remembered his words about mercy, honesty, and accountability. And more than the words, they remembered how he said them. Not with anger, not with the theatrical fire of his famous speeches, with the quiet directness of a man who had thought long and hard about something difficult and reached a conclusion he could defend. A German general had laid out a careful case and made one final, desperate appeal. Patton listened, weighed all of it, then gave the only answer that was genuinely his to give. Not the answer the general hoped for, the answer that was true. And that was the most Patton thing about the whole encounter. He could have been diplomatic, could have offered vague reassurances, sent the general off with something resembling comfort. He could have played the gracious victor, extending a small kindness to a defeated enemy. He was capable of all that when he wanted to be. He chose otherwise. Because George Patton, whatever else you could say about him, never once in his life was willing to lie to a man who needed the truth. And the truth, in the spring of 1945, inside a Bavarian military headquarters, with evidence of the German state's horrors piling higher every mile his army pushed east. That truth allowed no mercy, no comfort, no diplomatic cushion. It simply was what it was. Patton stated it plainly, the way he always did, and went back to work.